Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
What's up? What's down? What is going on around? I'm Paolo Leasing, author of Startup Taiwan, Foreigner's Business Guide. This show is to answer your questions about starting a business in Taiwan, so leave those questions in the comment section below. Our guest for today is Christine Orchard from the US. Christine has been in Taiwan for almost 11 years as a marketing professional. She's currently head of marketing at Arc.dev, an internet company for sourcing the best developers around the world. She finished her MBA from the National Taiwan University and her BA in International Studies, Chinese, and Economics, Summa Cum Laude from the Washington University in St. Louis. Christine, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Paolo. Also a fellow NTU grad. That's how we know each other.
Correct. So first question, how did you get to Taiwan? What's your Taiwan connection?
Sure. So I've been, spending, as you said, almost 11 years here. So how did I get here? So back in August 2010, I had just graduated college. And in college, I'd studied Chinese, I'd studied international studies. So I said, you know what? I need to go to a Chinese-speaking country to practice. I want to become a master at Chinese because Chinese language was so, it was like this enigma for me to be like, how can you possibly understand this language that's so different from mine? So I was just so curious to really be able to read a newspaper, for example. So I said, okay, I'm going to move to Taiwan. I'm going to teach English just so I can make some money. I just graduated college, right? No one's going to hire a fresh college grad for anything other than English. So that was the easiest way to move over here. And then I studied Chinese in the day, and then I did like the Bushiban cram school at night. And then very quickly, I was like, you know what? Can I get a job here? Because like the next step for me was if I could get a job where I could use Chinese, that could be a really a great next step for my career. But as I said, like no one was going to hire me a year before as a fresh grad. And what skills did I have as, a 22-year-old, 23-year-old? So I decided to go to NTU, get a degree in business to kind of learn some of the language and things that would be more applicable to getting a job here. So having studied international studies in undergrad, it was great for understanding Taiwan, but not so great for like finding an actual job. So I ended up doing that and then kind of got up into the startup space here in Taiwan. And that's where I've been ever since. I graduated in 2014, really helping startups in Taiwan who are looking to reach a global audience and, English-speaking audience, because that's where kind of my strength lies. So I've been in marketing, communications in the startup space ever since 2014.
Well, I think apart from being like a genius, imagine Summa Cum Laude, I think one of your other talents is being able to speak Chinese very fluently. And so I think this has helped you a lot, if I may say, that when you're starting to look for jobs here in Taiwan. Is this correct?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to look at it. Knowing Chinese is always going to help you, but you're also never going to be hired for a role where you're going to need native level Chinese, because I'm never going to be able to be competing with a native level Chinese speaker in, say, writing copy for local advertising or something like that. So I think it's knowing why you're wanting to learn the language. And usually it's because it lets you into rooms that you otherwise wouldn't able to be part of. So that means like, let's say you're having a board meeting and they want to bring you in. If you know no Chinese, they'll probably they wouldn't even invite you. But if they know, oh, Christine knows some Chinese, it's okay, we can throw her into this. You have access to conversations and kind of start to learn a lot more just because you can understand. So I think my expectations changed when I first started, like, hey, I'm going to read a newspaper. That was my goal. But it ended up being, I want to become fluent enough to understand what's going on around me, and I would still be able to contribute, even if that was sometimes still contributing in English. I think work on your listening skills. That's really the moral of the story.
Okay, so our topic for today is about finding the right web or app developers for your startup, and your company is really the best place to look for this. One of the key questions or problems is that this is a pain point because almost all of the best developers are already taken. They either work for the likes of Google and Facebook. How do you attract a developer with so much competition in the market?
Yeah, I mean, this is a big question of demand and supply. There's way much more demand for developers than there is supply. So there's huge competition. Obviously, I'm biased towards remote work. So I will say any, startup founder out there, if you haven't considered it, consider hiring remotely, because that will, number one, that just gives you access to talent around the world, not just the talent in your zip code. So hire remotely, but also I think it's not, when you look at the actual function of being a developer, that's kind of the same across all jobs. What is going to be the differentiator for a developer to join your company? It's usually going to be your mission, your values, the product that you're creating to solve some interesting problem in society or whatever it is. So I think if you're really looking to attract developers and make yourself competitive, it's working on those. It's parts of the job description that are less technical. Work on the technical part, make sure that's clear, but also really work on the job description to promote your company. So I have a really good example just within Arc. So Arc is a spinoff from CodeMentor, which is a online developer mentorship platform. So we're the same company, just two separate products. And so we had several team members who actually were recruited for our internal team through a Medium blog post that was shared by our head of engineering. So the head of engineering, he wrote, his thoughts, what it's like to work at Arc and CodeMentor, sharing his philosophies. And so those things were really attractive to developers here when we were trying to recruit, because we were, back in 2015 when CodeMentor started, who are we? Who's going to come work for an unknown startup? I think a lot of startup founders had the same problem. So really finding a way to tell your story, sharing your thinking, your values, and your mission, those kinds of things can be really helpful to attract talent, even though it's competitive.
Mm-hmm. But how do you evaluate a good developer aside from looking at their previous work?
Yeah. Okay. That's a great question. And that is why Arc exists in the first place, because so Arc, I'll talk a little bit more, a little bit later, exactly what we do, but it's essentially taking care of that technical assessment part so that you can know that they're qualified and that that, their skills are completely up to par. So we do help with that. But let's say you've already done that either through Arc or you're able to test those technical skills yourself. How do you evaluate a candidate? I think this goes for not only just developer candidates, but anyone. So you have the role fit and you have whether or not they're a team fit. So role is the easy part, as I mentioned. And then the team fit is saying, is this person, I'll give you a few examples of things you would look for. Is this person going to be an effective communicator? Is this person going to be autonomous and sort of be able to work without you kind of, micromanaging them? Because that's the kind of employee you want, especially as a startup founder. Is this person humble? So actually the founders of Amplitude, they found that humility was a key trait of some 10x developers. And this is something, through questioning, kind of seeing how people answer different questions, you can kind of get at, are they arrogant? Are they really proud of their accomplishments? Or do they present them in a way that's humble and still someone that has a growth mindset? So growth mindset's number 4, something I think very, very important, kind of goes with humility. And then also, is this person passionate about the thing, either about development itself or about the thing that you're doing and the product you're building and the mission? Because, as we said, there's tons of competition. If they're not passionate, I think that's something that, it's going to be hard to say at a company that you're not really passionate for if another thing very quickly piques your interest and you move away. So those are just 5 things that I can think of that you want to ask through certain questions during the interview process to kind of uncover those, I don't want to call them soft skills. They're more like the team fit aspects that you want to consider.
I like how you mentioned about finding someone who is very humble, because I feel like sometimes we tend to hire someone who's not humble, who's so proud of their work, because we feel like, oh, maybe this person is really good. But at the end of the day, if someone is not, like a strong fit for your team, and maybe you will not even get what you want, even if this developer indeed is like one of the best out there.
Yeah. And I think, that is something, as I said, it doesn't only apply to developers, but I think that's where, being a good person and working with someone that you want to work with, that you actually like, is so important to your long-term success. If you're a founder, you're not in this for 1 year, 2 years. Could be a 5 or 10 year, part of your life that you're really pouring everything into. So you need to look at more than just their technical, like, are they, one of the best technically? Hopefully, yes, but also they're a good person.
Correct. So one of the other pain points is, of course, cost, right? Like some projects are on a case-to-case basis in terms of development costs, like milestones. Is there like a standard way to determine a reasonable budget for hiring a developer?
Yeah, that's a question we get a lot, especially when you talk about remote work, because how do you define a remote salary if, you're talking about, different cities being taken into consideration. So I have a few key things to keep in mind. And this is kind of what we do either internally or when we're working with clients who are hiring. So you can definitely take the local market as a benchmark. There's a lot of different kind of standards that they have out there. You could even look on job boards and say, here in Taiwan, you can kind of see the range. So that's one way to just get started. And then when it comes to remote work, a lot of companies, I'd say most companies, decide to use the place you're working, like so the city that you live, and they would say, okay, you know what, if you lived in San Francisco, that's the benchmark of that X, like that's the highest. And then if you live in a lower cost of living city, we might multiply that by, 0.9 or 0.8. So GitLab does that, for example. That's how they will adjust the salary based on remote locations. There are a few companies who do universal salaries, like Help Scout is an example. They're really, really proud of doing same salary no matter where you live. But if that's still not like clear enough, we actually created this cool tool. It's at arc.dev/salaries. And we have all this information based on the developers in our network, what they've told us and the information they shared, what tech stack it is. So let's say, Ruby on Rails developer and where they live. So let's say Ruby on Rails developer based in Brazil. We'll give you the average for a junior developer as well as a senior developer. And you'll be able to kind of see some ranges there based on location or tech stack or a mix of the two. So I think this tool, because so many people have asked us, startup founders, but also companies who are new to remote and don't know how to deal with this, we created this tool to make it like super simple and just a really good reference point to help get you started.
I'm really interested about how Arc.dev works. Could you tell us a story about from the point of view of someone who's hiring a developer and also from the point of view of a developer who may want to be hired?
Sure. Okay. I guess I'll start with the developer side because you need the developer first before you can get the client to hire them. So as I mentioned, Arc.dev was founded from, this code mentor, the sister code mentor kind of grew out of that sister company. So we had, started to grow this network of developers and people started reaching out to us and asking, hey, can we work with them on things besides just mentorship? So we were like, okay, sure. Like, this is interesting. This was, 2017 or 18, way before remote work was like mainstream like it is becoming now. And so we said, okay, let's do this. So our role in that was kind of, as I mentioned earlier in the show, making sure they were technically qualified and kind of helping out clients who just didn't know how to judge that. Maybe they weren't technical or whatever. So we created a process over time. And right now the process looks like, okay, developer comes in, they're interested in joining Arc because Arc can connect them with great companies. They have a coding challenge. They have a one-on-one video call with one of our teammates who kind of goes through some of the communication personality questions to see, are they a good person, basically. Then we do pair programming. We have a kind of group of technical interviewers from really cool companies like Lyft and Facebook and IBM, who they interview them and they pair program with them to kind of see what level they're at. And so they'll be able to judge, are they like senior, like where would they put them in terms of people that they work with? So we use industry experts to judge that. And then the final part is just making sure once they are placed, if there's any issues at all, we kind of check in and make sure that, there's no red flags that show up once they are in the Arc network. So we have this vetting process that kind of tries to check all the most critical components. And once an Arc developer, once a developer goes through this process, essentially it's like you get a badge that says, I'm an Arc developer, and now I have access to these opportunities, kind of like a fast pass. Arc has given them recognition that, if you live in a country that you don't know how to judge someone from that country, no problem. Arc has done it for you. So that's a really great thing for people who, imagine you're a hiring manager and you're trying to judge on a resume, I don't understand this school. I've never heard of that. Or I don't know those names are just not familiar to me. So it really does help with that information asymmetry to let hiring managers know, this is a good candidate. So yeah, so that's what it looks like on the developer side.
I like how the system has an interview process because as a founder myself who does not have any technical co-founder, I always don't know what to ask if I wanted to hire a developer. And so sometimes, many times in the past, I have actually hired someone who's not fit, not because of the personality, but because of the actual qualifications to build what I wanted to build. So it's really nice if there's still a human intervention to actually gauge how a certain developer um, works. Could you actually meet your developer if both developers are in the same location? If you hired someone from the same location?
I mean, you could, but that would be up to you. So what we do, we're kind of like the matchmaker, and we like pair you up. And if you end up hiring that person, after that, you can meet up with them. But I would say in rare instances, I can think of a few cases where the developer would go into an office, but they're typically working remotely 99% of the time. So you could, but it's up to you. So we just make the initial connection and handle all that process beforehand. But once they're hired, yeah, it's up to you.
Do you know any known sites or apps that were built by developers who were hired from Arc? And if you could name them,
Yeah.
that would be great.
Yeah. So I mentioned a little bit about how the developer comes in. And so for the client, so these clients I'll kind of share about, it's actually really simple for them. That's why the process isn't interesting. They basically call us, they fill out a form, they tell us like what they're interested in. We kind of check the requirements they're looking for, both the hard skills and soft skills, and we understand what their company really does, what they're trying to do, and then we go and reach out to developers. Like we have, a whole team, sourcing and matching team, who's, they're basically trying to find the best match for the developer and the company. So we've worked with companies, or we've helped developers kind of get them placed in companies like Spotify is going to be the biggest name. It's going to be like a project that a developer has done with them. But we've also got, some smaller startups, pretty hot startups like Labelbox. Someone did a contentful powered website for them. We have, I was just talking to a developer, Francisco, 2 weeks ago. He's in Brazil and he works for Cobbler.io, which is another interesting startup in the finance space. A lot of education platforms like Open English, Civitas Learning. So usually companies that are coming to us, like they're very interesting, they're young, they're fast growing. We also have some bigger ones like Chegg and 5 Stars. So different sizes and shapes of companies, but they're all kind of some level of startup. And so as we're growing, we're getting more, post Series A startups kind of working with us as they're trying to scale teams. So like Civitas, they hired, 5 or 6 developers through Arc just because they were scaling so quickly.
Wow. Are there any like Taiwanese developers within Arc? Well, aside from the founder, like
yeah. So our team, the team at Arc, like the people who work there, I would say it's like 70% Taiwanese, and we are fully remote, but we do have an office in Taiwan here in Taipei, and then 30% are non-Taiwanese, or they live all around the world. So you'd think we'd have more Taiwanese developers in the platform, but I would say we only have a handful, just because all Taiwanese would be welcome to the platform, like everyone is welcome to, but there's going to be strict requirements like fluency in English. So that would, some people wouldn't be able to pass that bar, which is something we check during the vetting process. It would be time zone compatibility. So let's say the clients, which a lot of our clients are in, US, Canada region, they may not accept developers who don't have the time zone overlap. So it's because of those 2 reasons we don't have very many, but we do have one of their biggest success stories that I can remember from Taiwan. We had this developer named Tom Chen, and he's great. He's educated abroad, really global talent. He moved back to Taiwan because he wanted to be with his family. And this was probably like 2018, where getting a remote job was still a dream for a lot of people, but there just weren't opportunities. And so we were able to connect him with a company called teach.org. I don't know if you've heard of that. And he got hired for a small project and then ended up getting hired full-time by them. I think he may even still work there. He worked for them for quite a number of years if he doesn't still work with them. But that was the example where we really realized, what? Remote work can really change lives, because you don't have to leave your family and your friends anymore if you can live where you want to live, and you can still work, work abroad, work in any country or company that you want to. So yeah, we do have a few Taiwanese, but I would encourage anyone out there in Taiwan who wants to join us. Of course, we welcome you if you'd like us to increase the numbers of Taiwanese developers in Arc.
Sure. The other question is, do you think, so one of the other problems is actually finding a technical co-founder. Is this something that many have done through, or many have found through Arc.dev?
So it's something that I would say we could help with because we do have connections with developers kind of everywhere. It's not something that we do a lot, but as I said, we basically work to get to know what you're looking for. It's very important that we understand your criteria so we can accurately, find the right developer for you. So I'd say if you're able to articulate the job description very clearly and you know what you're looking for, I would say, give it a shot. You can, there's a form, as I mentioned, on our website. The team would reach out to you. So most of the time we're working with hiring managers who are looking for developers for their engineering teams, but it's not unheard of that, to have to find a technical founder through Arc.
So let's say you found like your technical co-founder, and obviously most of them actually work remotely. Do you have any tips to ensure that the two of you work together successfully?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, as a founder, whether you're, if you haven't started working remotely yet, I'm sure you'll probably get some experience with it soon. It's really about going into the relationship with two things in mind. Like, you're going to do things and experiment to see what works. So even if I tell you the blueprint today, things may change and you'll need to adjust based on, how the world changes, how your company changes. So going with that growth mindset and really make sure you're keeping people at the core of your mindset. So like, for example, as things happen and you may come across some sort of disagreement, make sure that you don't just respond really harshly over text, because a lot of times those miscommunications can blow up because it's coming across in a very negative way over Slack. So I think there's I could talk about remote work, endlessly, but I guess there's three main things to keep in mind if this is like day one, you just hired a developer. Okay. Over communication. That means you're going to use Slack, Trello, Jira, Asana, figure out the communication tools that you need. Like, you need to have those basics to start communicating regularly with this person. Set up a regular meeting cadence. So this is something that I recently read an article. It is a great article. Maybe we can link it in the show notes.
Sure.
So it's from the process of YouTube as a company scaling. So this was back in the early 2000s. And how did they deal with scaling and managing? And this was even before remote. But I think good management processes, they are the important part of how you can work successfully remotely. So what they did was they created certain rituals. And that's what you want to do as a founder. Every week you have the same rituals. There's certain, they're not meetings for meetings' sake at all, but there's certain things that people know they have to do at those given times. And those rituals are what can kind of help get you through periods of growth and adaptation. So I'm not giving you, these are the kind of meetings you need to have, but figuring out which ones those are. Are you doing every day, maybe an async update of your daily, the 3 things you completed that day? Your job is to figure out what that cadence looks like and make those rituals stick, because that's really kind of the glue that keeps a remote team together. So the information from YouTube, as I mentioned, they were a huge team, right? They were probably, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of people working for that company. But I think good processes can help teams of 2 people, of 3 people. It does not mean you can't apply it to you at this early stage, because as you grow, you'll already have those sort of processes in place to help you move more quickly. Oh, and the one more. So one more thing. It was just about organizing documents. Now, this is something that's also easy to forget. When you work in an office with someone, you just can say something to someone and you just take it for granted. But documentation, it doesn't sound sexy, but basically use Notion or something like it to document every single thing that you say you're going to do, action items. So I mentioned having meetings, but if you don't have the things documented, it's not going to happen. Things aren't going to move forward. So just make sure you're documenting. I'm a head of marketing, and so this applies to development teams, marketing teams, sales teams, everything. Everyone in my team has a document for everything. It may sound like overkill now, but it really saves the team when someone needs to go back and look for something, when a teammate in a different time zone is offline, just making your operation function remotely and globally.
Especially if your developer has made a lot of changes, and for some reason you need to change a developer, and the new developer wants to see the whole progress of your project. At least
Exactly.
He could be briefed easily if he could be handed with some notes about how it was developed from the very start, and where he could potentially fix it or find it.
Jump in.
Yeah, jump in.
Yeah.
Correct.
That's actually a really great practice for when you have teammates that offboard. It's the opposite of onboarding into the team. I have them kind of knowledge dump a lot of what they do. So this could be for developers or anyone in your team to really write down, how do you do that thing? Like it could be something as simple as how I do this process of posting on Twitter every week. As I mentioned, I'm the head of marketing, so my examples also come from the marketing world. But it's like, here's the process I go through, here's how I do research, here's how I post, here's some guidelines that I keep in mind when I post. And they just really share that knowledge very explicitly in a written form, because it's so obvious to that person, but once you write it down, it's so helpful for the team to know that. So especially, as you said, if a developer were to leave, you have that documentation about what they did, why they did it, the thought process, and all of those things.
Okay. So I want to focus now on a little bit about you. You've been here in Taiwan for like 11 years. And do you think, and one of the purpose of this this show is also, to basically tell the audience about the foreigners who live here. Do you think, as a foreigner, do you think Taiwan has made some notable improvements as far as improving the lives of foreigners?
Yeah, I would say, of course. I mean, but I came here before I had a smartphone, and before probably most of the world had a smartphone. I feel like, didn't the iPhone come out in 2008 or something? Yes. So I came in here in like 2010, no smartphone. The internet was there, but it wasn't like it is today. So lots of things have changed, but a few notable things about Taiwan specifically, U-Bike. U-Bike is everywhere. The expansion of the MRT is amazing. I'm just really grateful. And this definitely applies to Taiwanese as well, not just foreigners, but I think having great transportation makes it easier. So like, I don't need to have a car. That would be a lot harder if I lived in a country as a foreigner and I needed to drive. I do drive back in the US, but I don't drive here. So I would say transportation, I'm a huge fan of those improvements. And then I think the gold card was another big development that I think it started in 2018. So I actually got a gold card in 2018. I've had every type of visa you could have, pretty much. I've had the ARC, and now I have the APRC. I had the gold card before, but giving foreigners more options for visas, which gives us more flexibility to do work, take on work that we want to do, I think that's a huge benefit. It's still not, I still want to see more changes come. And I think that they have already adjusted some of the timeframes to get the APRC now has been reduced, things like that. So I'm happy to see that the government really does listen to the feedback of foreigners saying, hey, we want this. And they actually genuinely do listen and try to make changes. And then last would be like, that's kind of about Taiwan, but about the startup industry in Taiwan. I think I do still see a lot of potential, different accelerators popping up and doing really great work like AppWorks. I still hope the government does more to really support the startup industry, entrepreneurship. I think the finance industry still has a lot of room for innovation here. So there's a lot of things I think that the startup industry in Taiwan can address, and I'm excited to see that it's still alive, it's still vibrant, and even more and more so as I continue to live here.
Okay, let's do a fast round. So basically, these are just set of questions. Tell me what comes to your mind. Are you ready?
Yes. I have no idea what these questions are, by the way. These are brand new to me.
All about first thing that comes to your mind. So what's your daily breakfast?
Cereal. I love cereal. Now I'm talking like Special K with strawberries and milk. Like I eat that every single day, pretty much.
What show are you currently watching on Netflix?
Atypical. It's like season 4 or something.
Are you a morning or night person?
Morning person, for sure.
Wow. Are you Android or iOS user?
iOS, 1000%. I got AirPods, I got Mac, I've got Apple Watch. I can't go back.
Okay, so you answered that question, Mac or PC. Favorite game if you play games or board game?
Oh, yes, Splendor. It's a board game. I love board games. I don't like video games, but I like old-fashioned board games, and Splendor is my favorite.
Favorite movie of all time?
I feel like I haven't watched movies in a really, really long time. So I'll name a recent movie that really I thought was really, really good. It's called Tallulah. It probably came out 3 or 4 years ago. And I hadn't watched a movie in a long time where I was like, That was a really good movie. So I won't say I have a favorite, but in the last few years, that movie struck me as, wow, it's a good one.
Favorite book?
Favorite book. Oh, look at my bookshelf. Okay, maybe it sounds super tech bro of me.
Or book?
Like Sapiens. Like I genuinely like Sapiens. I think it's definitely changed the way I think about the world. Somehow, have you read Sapiens, Paulo?
No. What is it?
Please. Yes. So it's because I have two books by the author on my shelf. It is basically how do I summarize this book? It's basically about like how humans evolved from monkeys and kind of evolution in the world and how the world developed. And it kind of reminds me of, if you've read like Guns, Germs, and Steel. It was kind of similar to that style of book. But I think, I learned so many things. If I look through the highlights that I've made in that book, it really makes you feel like you are so small in this universe, because you realize like how much the world changes and how things develop. It's just amazing. So it kind of puts life in perspective. And because I'm a more of a humanities and language person, I didn't spend a lot of my time studying science, just in school and that. So I think learning some of these things as an adult was like, how come I never knew this? How come I didn't know these details that are so cool and so interesting? So
maybe because at least in my old days, education was being forced, so that science became so like something you need to memorize, as opposed to something that is like a nice story about evolution, about how planets are composed of gas, or what makes a color different, what type of gas, or the number of moons that surround some of the planets, things like that.
It was too like logical that it didn't mean anything to you as a child.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Like it felt like it was being forced, but more recently when I'm reading about science, just like you, I'm also amazed about how come I never appreciated it back when I was in school.
Yeah, but that really just goes to show how important storytelling is, just as an art form. It doesn't matter if you're talking about science or whatever. If you can tell a good story, you can communicate to people in such a really meaningful way. And so I think, like, honestly, this whole thing we're talking about today, I think the bottom line is, if you can tell a good story, you can attract developers to work with you. I mean, just bring it back to that. But seriously, storytelling is so critical. I'm a huge proponent of learning how to tell good stories.
I love how you wrapped up our show. So finally, let's talk about your action item. How could this show help you? What are your plans?
Yes. So I'm really enjoying getting to hear from other foreigners in Taiwan, or people who are, building their careers remotely as well. So I would encourage you to follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn. So you can search Christine Orchard. Also on Twitter. I'm new-ish to Twitter. Like I started a few years ago, but I've started to write on LinkedIn and Twitter a bit more, like short form. So my Twitter handle is Xteen. So my name's Christine, but I use Xteen Orchard. You can find me on Twitter. And so I'm starting to write and share some of my ideas and learnings about management, startups, cross-cultural teams, of course, remote work. So anyone who's interested in those things, I'd be happy to connect with you and just, see if I can, we can share experiences with each other. And also, if you're interested in ARC as a company, we are actually hiring. My team, I'm hiring the marketing team. We're hiring in design, developers, everything. So if you're in Taiwan, actually, if you're anywhere, because we do hire from all over the world, check out our careers page. It's in the footer of Arc.dev. Just go to the footer and you can find our careers page.
I'll put the careers page in the video description below. And I also know that you are also doing a podcast for Arc.dev.
Yes.
Right? Arc.dev.
So we had 2 seasons so far. The first season was by my colleague Jovian, and that was focused on kind of remote thought leadership, because that was before remote was a thing. And then COVID happened. And then I did season 2, which was last year. I think we kicked it off in July. So I interviewed remote managers on how to actually do remote well. It's called managing Mastering Remote, sorry. It's called Mastering Remote. So we're still playing with different form factors of how we do podcasts and videos. So in the marketing team. So right now we're actually kind of pivoting a little bit, and we want to do something similar to what you're doing, Paulo. We want to explore YouTube a bit more. So we did podcasts. You can definitely check those out, but I haven't made new episodes in about a year. But you will see me on YouTube very soon, doing a lot more events, a lot more interviews and things like that, because we think YouTube is an interesting space to continue to develop and share our messages.
Well, we'll be looking forward to that YouTube channel. Once it's ready, let us know the address, and we'll put it on our video description. I think we need a lot more like female leaders, promoting their companies or promoting whatever they're doing here in Taiwan. So yeah, that's the last question for this show. And really, thank you so much for your time, Christine. For our audience,
great, Paulo.
For our audience, I'll leave all the links that Christine mentioned, and also if you want to connect with her, I'll put it in the description below. Until next time.
All right, thanks so much. Really appreciate the invitation.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.